The Battle of Salamis, fought in 480 BC, a grand naval confrontation between the Greek city-states and the Persian Empire. It occurred in the straits between the mainland and Salamis, an island near Athens. The Greek fleet, who were significantly outnumbered, was commanded by the great Themistocles, who devised a cunning plan to lure the larger Persian fleet into the narrow straits, where their numbers would be less of an advantage, eerily reminiscent of the recently fought Battle of Thermopylae. Themistocles sent a servant to Xerxes I, the Persian king, who falsely claimed that the Greeks were in panic and disarray, planning to flee. Xerxes took the bait and ordered his fleet into the straits, where they soon found themselves cramped and unable to maneuver effectively. It was then when the Greek ships, smaller and more agile, were able to attack with greater efficiency and decimated the Persian fleet. Thus, this victory was among the greatest of ancient times, as it significantly weakened Persian naval power, not to mention morale, contributing to their eventual withdrawal from Greece. Hello and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, it's good to meet you. And if you're coming back for more, then it's great to have you back with me again. As always, if you like to support the channel, this is the best way to do it. You just enjoy the content. It's all good fun. If you want to go further than that, click the like and subscribe button. That helps YouTube know that you want to spread the word and want more people to see my channel. And further than that, just have a look at the video description. And so now, without any further delay, let us get into the topic for today, and that is the great naval battle of Salamis. Now let's go back to the main reasons how we got here in the first place, because we don't end up in a battle of this size without a good background. Well, it all started with something called the Ionian Revolt, spearheaded by one Aristogoras, the satrap of Miletus, from 499 to 494 BC, which marked the beginning of significant conflict between the Greek city-states and the nascent Persian Empire, which at that time was not under Xerxes, but under Darius I. Now this revolt, significant for involving regions not yet within the Persian fold, particularly threatened the stability of Darius's empire. Darius, who had solidified his rule by quelling various insurrections, saw the involvement of Athens and Eretria in supporting the revolt as a pretext not only for punishment, but also an excuse to expand his dominion into the Greek mainland, a casus belli for a greater war. Thus, his war goals and ambitions kept piling up. Now in response, Darius launched a campaign in 492, led by Mardonius, which effectively subdued Thrace and coerced Macedon into becoming a vassal to Persia, demonstrating his new empire's military capabilities, and capabilities of which those who were not already aware of them were certainly about to be. Thus, the first direct Persian assault on Greece came in 490 under generals Datis and Artaphernes, who initially targeted Naxos and then moved against Eretria, which they brutally sacked. The expedition culminated at the Battle of Marathon, and yes, I'm sure you've heard of that one, where the Athenians, despite being vastly outnumbered, secured a stunning victory and forced the Persian forces to retreat No doubt this left a bitter memory in the mouth of the Persians. And, well, they had to get them back somehow, didn't they? But Darius, he was undeterred, and he began preparations for a more extensive invasion to achieve complete subjugation of Greece. However, his plans were interrupted by a revolt in Egypt in 486, and his subsequent death postponed the planned conquest. Nothing postpones a conquest like being dead. But don't worry, he had a replacement lined up. His son, Xerxes I, who very quickly quashed the Egyptian revolt and resumed preparations for invading Greece, because that was the big prize. Well, Xerxes' plans were admittedly grandiose, including the engineering marvels of bridging the Hellespont and constructing a canal across the isthmus of Mount Athos to avoid treacherous waters that had previously claimed a Persian fleet. And do remember that the Persians, well, if you've seen a map, you don't really learn how to swim. There's not much water, unless you're in the very far north. But generally, the Persians weren't the best swimmers. The Greeks, well, they grew up around water, didn't they? Sailing, navigation, all sorts of naval endeavors. That was their specialty. The Persians were better on land. Well, by 480 BC, these preparations had materialized, enabling Xerxes' vast army to march across the Hellespont on pontoon bridges, poised for a significant confrontation with the Greek states. Now, since that Battle of Marathon in 490, Athens had been anticipating further Persian attempts to subjugate Greece. The Greeks weren't stupid. They knew that this was far from over. They'd won the battle, but the war was about to begin. Well, under the strategic foresight of Themistocles, a prominent Athenian politician, it was resolved in 482 BC that Athens would augment its naval power by constructing a large fleet of triremes. Recognizing the impossibility of combating the Persians alone on both land and sea, Athens saw the necessity of forming an alliance with other Greek city-states. In 481, as Xerxes continued to marshal his forces for an invasion, he sent envoys throughout Greece demanding the symbolic tribute of earth and water, signifying their complete submission. Notably, he excluded Athens and Sparta from these demands, effectively acknowledging their leadership roles against Persian interests. Didn't want to waste the trip. Well, this diplomatic gesture inadvertently rallied support to those two dominant Greek states. That year, representatives from various city-states convened at a congress in Corinth, establishing a pan-Hellenic alliance, which was unprecedented in Greek history. You see, the Greeks never really got along in the beginning. If they weren't fighting somebody else, they were certainly very busy fighting each other. Well, now faced with mutual destruction, they found it to be in everybody's best interests to team up, at least for the time being. Now, this alliance, this pan-Hellenic alliance, was vested with the authority to send for help and coordinate the deployment of troops across member states, a significant step given the prevailing conflicts among them. The alliance had initially decided to fortify the Vale of Tempe on the Thessalian border to halt the Persian advance. However, they soon abandoned this position due to the strategic advisories from Alexander I of Macedon, who indicated that the pass could be circumvented and warned of the formidable size of Xerxes' forces. The retreat was hastened by the arrival of news that Persian forces had crossed the Hellespont and were already in Europe. Well, a revised defense strategy was quickly formed. The Greeks planned to make a stand against the Persians at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, which was ideally suited for their smaller hoplite forces to hold against a larger army. Concurrently, the Greek navy would block the nearby straits of Artemisium to prevent the Persian fleet from flanking the army at Thermopylae. The strategy was put into action as the Persian army approached. Despite their numerical inferiority, the Greeks managed to hold Thermopylae for 3 days. Eventually, however, they were outmaneuvered when Persian troops found a way around the pass through a little mountain trail, not known to too many. But they were betrayed by a little pathetic man called Ephialtes. And here's a fun fact for you. To this very day, the name Ephialtes is synonymous with betrayal and weakness. It's kind of like calling somebody a Judas. You know, Judas Iscariot, betraying Jesus Christ and throwing him to the hands of the Roman adjudicators. But, yeah, in Greece you will not find many people called Ephialtes. Well, of course, the majority of the Greek forces withdrew. But you know the story that the Spartans and the Thespians remained, fighting to their last in a legendary last stand that ensured their enduring fame. Well, back at sea, the Battle of Artemisium, fought concurrently with Thermopylae, initially resulted in a stalemate. However, upon learning of the fall of Thermopylae, the Greek fleet decided to withdraw, recognizing that holding Artemisium was no longer strategically viable. As a contingency, the Peloponnesian states prepared defenses at the Isthmus of Corinth, and the Athenian civilians, foreseeing the potential fall of their city, were evacuated to the Peloponnesian city of Troezen for safety. Now, if you want to know all about the Battle of Thermopylae, I'll probably link a video in the description or the comments, and, well, you can go and watch it. I think I've made 2 Battle of Thermopylae videos right now. They seem to be quite popular. Right, well, back to Salamis. The Allied fleet navigated from Artemisium to Salamis, aiding the final evacuation of Athens. On their journey, Themistocles strategically left inscriptions intended for the Ionian crews in the Persian fleet at various watering holes, urging them to defect to the Greek side. Now, do remember that I said that a lot of the Persians, well, they didn't grow up as formidable sailors. So what do? Well, the one thing they didn't have was sailing knowledge, but the one thing they did have was lots of money. And everybody has a price. Just ask Ephialtes. And the Greek naval mercenaries they hired to steer the boats for them and give general advice about all this. Seems that there was more than one Ephialtes in Greece in those days. Now, following the battle at Thermopylae, the Persian forces under Xerxes' command proceeded to ravage the cities of Plataea and Thespiae, which had refused to submit, and then advanced to Athens, which of course had been fully evacuated. In response, the Greek allies fortified the Isthmus of Corinth by demolishing the only road through it and constructing a defensive wall, aiming to halt the Persian advance. The efficacy of this strategy hinged on the Allied fleet's ability to block the Persian navy from ferrying troops across the Saronic Gulf to flank the Corinthian Isthmus defenses. During a crucial war council convened post-evacuation, Corinthian commander Edemantus suggested positioning the fleet near the isthmus to enforce this blockade. But contrarily, Themistocles advocated for an offensive strategy, leveraging the close-quarter combat tactics that had been effective at Artemisium, persuading the allies to position their navy near Salamis instead. Determining the exact chronology of the battle is, well, it's a little bit challenging. But don't worry, we have our ever-reliable Herodotus to help us out. That's a joke. He's known for being a little bit unreliable, but let's hear what he has to say anyway. Well, he implies a swift sequence of events following Athens' fall, suggesting that the battle might have occurred shortly after. However, it is plausible that the Persians spent several weeks capturing Athens and reorganizing themselves, which would align with the naval clash closer to late September or maybe early October. During this period, strategic discussions among Persian leaders took place, with advisors like the Queen of Halicarnassus, Artemisia, cautioning against naval engagement in the Straits of Salamis. But, well, perhaps they didn't listen as they should have. The decision to engage at Salamis may have been influenced by perceived disunity within the Greek camp, potentially amplified by Persian intelligence operations or Themistocles' own deceptive tactics. Xerxes, possibly anticipating an easy victory against a fragmented Greek opposition, ordered his fleet to block the southern exit of Salamis. Themistocles seized this moment to deploy a disinformation strategy, sending his trusted servant, Siginos, to mislead Xerxes into believing that the Greeks were in complete panic and that they were about to retreat, basically urging him to attack. If you want to beat the Greeks, you better act right now, and I'll tell you exactly how to do it. Come on, he couldn't fall for that, surely. Well, he did. Spoiler alert. Anticipating a straightforward triumph on the information he got from Siginos, Xerxes positioned himself on Mount Aigaleo to observe what he expected to be a decisive Persian victory. But as night fell, the Greeks, bolstered by the arrival of Aristides, and further convinced of their need to stand and fight the movements of the Persian fleet, prepared for battle. Now, contrary to Persian expectations of a Greek retreat, the Allied fleet was arrayed and ready for battle by dawn. Herodotus documented the strength of the Allied fleet of the Battle of Salamis as 378 triremes, detailing contributions by various city-states. We're not going to go through every single one of them, but just think about that number of 378. However, the total he provides for the individual contingents amounts to only 371, which is very typical of Herodotus. Like I said, he's notoriously reliable. He specifies that while the Aeginetans had additional ships, only their 30 most seaworthy participated at Salamis. suggesting a reserve of 12 back at Aegina. Additionally, 2 ships are noted to have defected from the Persians to the Greeks before the battles of Artemisium and Salamis, potentially raising the count to 373 or maybe 380 if we include the Aegean reserve. Now, discrepancies exist in other ancient sources regarding the size of the Greek fleet. Aeschylus, a veteran of Salamis, mentioned 310 Greek triremes. Theseus aligned with this, noting 110 Athenian vessels. Hyperides suggesting a total of 220. Leadership of this fleet was nominally held by the Spartan Eurybiades, due to ejections from the city-states to Athenian command, despite Themistocles' de facto control. Now, Herodotus also records the Persian fleet as initially comprising 1,207 triremes, which is, of course, certainly outnumbering the Greeks. But he does note losses, about a third to storms near Magnesia and Euboea, and 50 to Greek actions at Artemisium, with subsequent reinforcements from Thracian Greeks totaling 120 ships. Despite these losses, he suggests that the Persian fleet remained numerically robust at Salamis. Aeschylus echoes the figure of 1,207 Persian ships at Salamis, while other sources like Diodorus and Lysias offer similar counts of around 1,200 for earlier assemblies. The consistency of that figure of 1,207 in ancient narrative suggests a widely held belief among the Greeks regarding the size of the Persian threat. But some modern historians accept this figure due to its prevalence in contemporary records. Others, noting possible symbolic numerology linked to Homeric epics, argue for a smaller and, frankly, more plausible number of Persian warships actually present at Salamis, estimating between 600 to 800, after accounting for documented reinforcements and losses. Now, in general, the Persian strategy in 480 BC was centered on a rapid and overwhelming invasion to conquer Greece within a single campaign season. They were really hoping that they would just fall like a house of cards. Xerxes' massive force was designed to intimidate and quickly subjugate the Greek states. However, the Greek strategy was focused on defensive tactics, utilizing their smaller numbers, albeit effectively, by holding key narrow locations and prolonging the campaign, which they successfully did at Thermopylae. Well, despite the initial underestimation of Greek resolve, Xerxes soon realized that sustaining his large invasion force was impractical over an extended period. Too many mouths to feed. And his presence at the empire's edge was also strategically risky. Well, the Battle of Thermopylae revealed the futility of frontal assaults against well-defended Greek positions. The Persians recognized that their best chance of a quick victory lay in outflanking the Greeks, necessitating control over the sea to bypass the defenses of the Isthmus of Corinth. Therefore, the key to Persian success became the destruction of the Allied navy, which would allow Persian forces to encircle and defeat the Greek land forces and potentially force a Greek surrender within the campaign season. However, it was Queen Artemisia of Caria who advised Xerxes that engaging in a naval battle at Salamis was unnecessary. She argued that by merely maintaining a naval presence, and perhaps pushing further into the Peloponnese, the Persians could achieve their objectives without the risks of a battle, while the Greeks, on the other hand, unable to sustain a prolonged defense against such odds, would likely disperse to defend their respective cities, every man for himself, or every state for itself. Well, of course, despite this counsel, the desire for a decisive confrontation drove both the Persians and the Greeks to commit to this naval engagement at Salamis. The battle was not strategically necessary for the Persians, who could have continued to apply pressure on land and sea without immediate combat. But it was that allure of a swift and conclusive victory that, well, it was just too good to pass up. The Persian fleet, despite being larger and possessing better sailing ships as noted by Herodotus, faced an unexpected challenge from the newly constructed Athenian triremes. These Athenian ships were part of a fleet expansion initiated by Themistocles in 483 BC, where he urged Athens to put up the investment to build another 200 triremes. Well, despite their crew's relative inexperience, these ships were pivotal for the Greeks in the conflict against Persia. The standard naval tactics of the era included ramming, which was facilitated by the triremes' reinforced bows, and boarding actions by marines, transforming sea engagements into what was effectively extensions of land battles. The Persians, along with their Asiatic Greek allies, were adept at a maneuver called diekpolos, likely involving a swift rowing through the gaps in enemy lines to attack the sides of opposing vessels. Such a tactic, of course, demanded highly skilled crews, suggesting a strategic advantage for the Persians in open sea battles, where their superior seamanship and numerical strength could be fully utilized. Herodotus hints that the Allied ships were heavier and possibly less maneuverable, a characteristic attributed perhaps to bulkier construction, or the substantial weight of armored hoplite marines on board. Each ship carrying fully armored hoplites added significantly to the overall weight, potentially making the Allied ships more stable in the windy conditions of Salamis, but also less likely to perform nimble maneuvers such as their diekpolos. Now, the Persian preference for open sea battles contrasted sharply with the Greek strategic imperative to engage in narrower waters, where the overwhelming numbers of the Persian fleet would be less effective. The Battle of Artemisium showcased the Greeks' efforts to counter the Persian numerical superiority, yet it likely underscored the necessity of an even more restricted battlefield, leading to the choice of the Straits of Salamis as the obvious place for their decisive stand. So, in the context of these tactical considerations, the decision by the Persians to enter the Straits of Salamis pretty much played directly into the Greek hands. Of course, it was all likely influenced by the strategic deception of Themistocles, but hey, all is fair in love and war now. Thus he misled the Persians, confidently sailing into battle, believing that the internal discord within the Greek ranks would have them break at the first sight of trouble, and this prompted the Persian decision to completely block off the straits to cut off any Greek escape. Of course, the Greeks couldn't get out, but neither could the Persians. Thus, it must be said also that the Battle of Salamis remains one of the less clearly documented naval conflicts of antiquity, with details obscured by the chaotic nature of the engagement and the limited perspectives of the ancient historians. The complexity of the battle fought in the narrow straits made it difficult for contemporaries, perhaps excluding Xerxes, to grasp the full scope of the events as they unfolded. But according to historical reconstructions, the allied Greek fleet was likely arrayed into two rows due to the constricted battlefield. The Athenians held the left wing of this formation, while the right was possibly occupied by the Spartans, though sources like Diodorus suggest it could have been the Megarians and the Aeginetians. The deployment of the fleet stretched north to south, anchored possibly from the coast near modern-day St. George's Islet to the southern cape of Salamis. Contrary to Diodorus' assertion of an east-west alignment, it is improbable that the Greeks would position a flank against Persian-occupied territory, indicating a strategic preference to avoid exposing any side directly to the enemy. The Persian fleet's movement on the eve of the battle are also a subject of debate. Herodotus presents a scenario where the Persians entered the straits at dusk, potentially aiming to surprise the Greeks presumed to already be in retreat. However, the logistics of maneuvering such a large fleet in a confined and dark environment casts more than a little bit of doubt on this interpretation. It is thought to be more likely that the Persians positioned themselves to block the strait's southern exit by night and reoriented north-south by the morning, preparing for combat in a more traditional formation. And this formation, according to accounts, consisted of 3 lines, with the Phoenicians on the strategic right flank near Mount Aigaleo, the Ionians on the left, and other Persian contingents in the center. Such an arrangement suggests a calculated approach to engage the Greeks with a formidable array of forces, aiming to exploit their numerical and perhaps tactical superiority. Diodorus's mention of an Egyptian squadron sent to navigate around Salamis to seal off the northern escape route aligns with a comprehensive strategy of encirclement favored by Xerxes. Though Herodotus does not corroborate this maneuver, the possibility remains a topic of speculation among historians. Additionally, Xerxes' decision to station troops on the islet of Psytalea further illustrates the Persian intent to eliminate any Greek survivors from the battle, indicating a ruthlessly thorough approach to the engagement. Regardless of the exact timing for their entering the straits, the Persians did not initiate their attack on the Greek allies until daylight. The Greeks, contrary to Persian expectations of a retreat, were well prepared and used the night to ready themselves for the confrontation. According to Herodotus, as dawn broke and the Greek fleet was deploying, the Persian forces launched their assault. Aeschylus provides a dramatic account of the moments just before the clash, describing how the Persian forces had heard the Greeks chanting their battle hymn, a poignant call to defend their homelands and their cherished values. Before they even saw the Greek ships, they certainly heard them. As the dawn broke, and the Persians prepared to attack, they heard the Greek soldiers singing, "O sons of the Greeks, go, liberate your country, liberate your children, your women, the seats of your fathers' gods, and the tombs of your forebears. Now is the struggle for all things." I'm sure it's a lot more poetic in Greek, but that's mainly the translation that was given by Aeschylus. So, Herodotus adds another controversial episode involving the Corinthians, who, he notes, were said by Athenians to have sailed away from the battle, heading northwards. But this account is disputed by other Greeks and might have been a strategic feint to scout the northern exit of the straits, to mislead the Persians into thinking the Greek alliance was indeed crumbling. If it were indeed that the Corinthians did momentarily withdraw, they promptly rejoined the battle, dispelling any notion of a real retreat from them. Either way, as the battle ensued, the constrained waters of the straits caused disarray within the Persian ranks, who increasingly found themselves cramped and poorly organized. Contrary to appearing eager for combat, the Greek fleet did initially seem to retreat, which, according to Plutarch, was a tactical move to achieve a more favorable position and to await the morning winds that would be at their backs and give them an advantage, particularly because ramming was the soup du jour. Now, during this tactical withdrawal, Herodotus recounts a legendary vision witnessed by the Greeks, a phantom woman chiding them for retreating too far, spurring them into action. More credibly, though, Herodotus and other sources suggest that the Greek maneuver of backing water was a prelude to a decisive charge. The confrontation began in earnest when a single Greek ship, claimed by both the Athenians and Aeginetans as one of their own, aggressively rammed a Persian vessel. This bold action triggered a general advance by the Greek fleet, which surged forward to engage the disordered Persian ships. As the battle unfolded, the chaotic nature of naval warfare at the time meant that the participants had limited perspectives of the broader conflict. Triremes, the primary warships used, were equipped with formidable rams designed to breach the hulls of enemy vessels, or even destroy their ore banks, crippling them for easier boarding. And if the ramming didn't secure a decisive victory, heavily armored marines, including Greek hoplites, would engage in close combat, swinging onto the decks and stabbing everybody. Chop chop. Essentially transforming naval engagements into a kind of floating land battle. Persian forces, while likely less heavily armed, were nonetheless prepared for such encounters. During the melee, the disciplined coordination of the Greek fleets allowed them to press the initial lines of Persian ships backward. This movement caused a domino effect as the retreating ships collided with their advancing second and third lines, leading to further disarray and confusion within the Persian ranks. On the Greek left, the battle saw significant developments with the death of the Persian admiral Ariabignes, brother of King Xerxes, so certainly a high-profile target, a good one to get out of the way in the early game. Now, his early demise left the Phoenician squadrons completely without leadership, contributing to their disorder and eventual retreat towards a shoreline where many ran aground. Of course, when you're not receiving any orders, and everybody is screaming and dying around you, you have to make it up for yourself. And I suppose you can't blame a lot of those men at the time for thinking, well, if they're not ordering us to advance, then it's probably all over. Let's get out of here, lads. save our skin. Well, Plutarch provides a dramatic account of Ariabenes' death, noting that he was killed during an attempt to board the ship manned by Amenias and Socles of Pallene. As Ariabenes boarded, he was repelled by spears and subsequently fell into the sea. Plutarch also records that it was Artemisia who identified Ariabenes' body amidst the flotsam and ensured its retrieval, bringing it back to Xerxes, which is quite nice of him. Well, during the Battle of Salamis, Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus, commanding the Carian contingent of the Persian fleet, found herself in a precarious situation when pursued by Amenias of Pallene, an Athenian captain. In a desperate bid to escape, Artemisia rammed a friendly Persian ship from Calindia, sinking it and killing its crew, including its king, Damasithemos. This act of self-preservation misled Amenias into believing that she was an ally, prompting him to cease his pursuit. Well, from his vantage point on Mount Aigaleo, Xerxes observed the incident and mistakenly thought Artemisia had struck an enemy vessel. Impressed by her apparent aggression amidst the otherwise lackluster performance of his commanders, he reportedly remarked, "My men have become women, and my women have become men." Well, the battle had definitely turned against the Persians, leading to their chaotic retreat towards Phalerum. The Aeginetans took advantage of this situation, ambushing the retreating Persian ships, further compounding their losses. The remnants of the Persian fleet sought refuge at the harbour of Phalerum under the protection of the Persian land forces. Meanwhile, the Athenian general Aristides led a force to Citaleia, an island where Xerxes had stationed a garrison, and executed all of the Persian troops that were stationed there. The aftermath of the battle left the Persian naval forces severely depleted. Herodotus notes that the following year, the Persian fleet was reduced to 300 triremes, indicating a loss of possibly 200 to 300 ships. That's a lot of wood, based on earlier estimates of its strength. Now, this disparity in casualties between the two sides was exacerbated by the fact that many Persians, unlike the Greeks, could not swim. This, of course, led to a higher rate of drownings among the Persian ranks. But you really think they would have learned before joining the navy? Hindsight is a beautiful thing. Xerxes' reaction to the defeat was, let's say it was one of bitter disappointment. He was a little upset. Observing the defeat all the way from his comfortable chair on Mount Aigaleo, he witnessed some Phoenician captains accusing the Ionians of cowardice. Seizing upon a counter-example of Ionian valor, witnessing an Ionian ship capturing an Aeginetan vessel, Xerxes ordered the execution of the Phoenician accusers, decrying their slander against men who he thought were more noble than them. Later, as reported by Diodorus, Xerxes executed those Phoenicians responsible for initiating the fleet's retreat and threatened severe punishment for the remaining crews, prompting the surviving Phoenician ships to flee to Asia under the cover of night. Well, after the defeat at Salamis, Xerxes tried to construct a bridge or causeway across the straits to attack the Athenians directly, but this effort was thwarted by the vigilant Greek fleet now controlling the straits, and well and truly controlling it. Well, in the wake of the setback, Herodotus describes a council of war where the Persian general Mardonius attempted to downplay the naval defeat, urging Xerxes not to worry about the incredible loss of ships, and suggesting either an immediate attack on the Peloponnese or a more cautious delay. Mardonius emphasized the valor of the Persian soldiers and proposed that if Xerxes chose to retreat to Persia, he could leave behind a substantial force under his command to continue the campaign. Xerxes, concerned about the security of the bridges over the Hellespont and the possibility of his army being trapped in Europe, decided to withdraw the majority of his forces back to Persia. He left Mardonius in Greece with a select force of elite infantry and cavalry to attempt to finish subduing the Greeks. This decision led to the Persian troops to vacate Attica, allowing the Athenians to return to their city, which had unfortunately been ravaged by the Persians. Now in 479 BC, Mardonius once again striked Athens, prompting the second destruction of the city. However, the Greek states, primarily under Spartan leadership, resolved to confront Mardonius and march to Attica. Mardonius, preferring to fight in open terrain where he could effectively use his cavalry, withdrew to Boeotia. The two forces eventually clashed near Plataea, where the Greeks secured a decisive victory, effectively annihilating a large portion of the Persian army, and effectively ending the Persian invasion. Simultaneously, the Greek fleet engaged the remnants of the Persian navy at the Battle of Mycale, further crippling Persian naval power, and effectively marking the strategic end of Persian ambitions in Greece, at least for now. Well, thank you very much for listening to my lovely little video on the Battle of Salamis. I hope you had a good time. Well, I'd like to thank the top tier patrons: Scott, Aaron, James, Tim, Wendy, Jeffrey, JC, Stark Factory, and Charles. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for listening so far too. Aren't we all having such a great time together on this channel? And now that I'm over 50,000 subscribers, I certainly feel like I've got quite an audience. I'm very lucky to be on this platform, and I'm very, very lucky to have you all here listening to me. Sometimes it doesn't feel like much to get just 1,000 views on a video, but it's a hell of a lot more than what a lot of other people get. And if you put 1,000 people in a room together, that would certainly make me nervous being up on stage looking out to them. Well, I'd like to wish you a good rest, a good night, and make sure you have a good breakfast. Farewell for now, my friends.